Greetings, everyone. This is A.M.O.P.S, and this is the commentary to erasing racism from all Jewish communities. So, as you know, this is a month of positive solutions, and this particular topic is erasing racism from all Jewish and Israeli communities. Now, one of the first questions that came up whenever I started talking about doing this video was people asked me, why would I even do a topic like this? And the predominant reason was because a number of years back there was a rabbi who once told me that because of my background, because of how I came to be who I am and all my family's background, I was going to have to stand between several different worlds. The best way I can kind of describe it is like that statement from the newest Star Trek movie. You'll always be a child of two worlds and fully capable of deciding your own destiny. The question you face is which path will you choose? Well, I choose to go by all of them, with basically who I am as a Jew being the centerpiece. So let's get to the issues here. In order to understand the first video I did, this second video is needed. So you can see here the different issues I brought up in the first video concerning why there are some Jews, not all, some Jews who have accepted racist concepts. So this is the information for that. So when I say what I'm talking about, what do I mean? One of the things I mentioned is Jews trying to be white. What I'm talking about here is more of the abstract concepts of black and white. Now, what's interesting is when we look throughout Jewish texts, we see that there's a particular group of texts that deals with not race as we know it, but basically in terms of how the world was viewed in ancient times in terms of the Israeli or the Jewish perspective. This particular slide here shows you one of the oldest texts that talks about the issues of, for example, the sons of Noah when they came out of the ark. So this is a very important piece to look at. The main issue being you can't really take the modern concept of race. Because one of the reasons why is if you look in this particular section from the Talmud, it says that the Israelis of that time, Beth Yisrael, which is a nation, not a race, not a religion, at that time was made up of people who were not black or white, but were somewhere in between. Of course, that particular section was not talking about race. It was simply talking about skin disorders, using the kind of understanding of who the Beth Yisrael or the Israelim or Israelis at that time, who they were. So it's important to go through some terminology right now to get a better idea of exactly who we're talking about. So as you see in a number of my videos, I like to be able to stick to the original Hebrew terms themselves in many cases rather than the English. Okay, so this is an important point. In ancient times, Israelis did not see themselves according to race, because race is, of course, a modern thing. They saw themselves as a nation, and one of the ways we know this is the terminology that they used about themselves, either being called Am, a bit, or basically a ben or b'nai. So basically, when we look at the non-Jewish world, for example, you can see below a list of the type of non-Jews that existed, at least the ones that could live in the land of Israel themselves. And the reason was because Israeli society was formed in this way here, listing the various ethnic groups within the Israeli nation. First of the Kohanim, the Leviim, regular Israelim, Gerim, and Ger Toshav, which all you can see listed here and are defined pretty clearly. Now, one of the things that's very important to remember is this issue sometimes is thrown at us about like when we talk about the goyim. In ancient times, in biblical times, basically a goy was just a nation. It was nothing derogatory, nothing negative. It was just a nation. Israel in the Bible is actually called a goy in a number of situations, so nothing bad about that. Now, what started to happen after Israel was conquered by a number of outside nations, the word goy became known as basically the nations that practice what's called avodah zarah. Like I mentioned before, they basically practice paganism or incorrect concepts according to Judaic understanding. Those were the only non-Jews who were considered goy. Those who did not, of course, were other peoples. So Jews looked at the world no different than all the other nations around them in terms of like this list of the table of nations that the Egyptians saw. Basically giving just some brief concepts of how they saw themselves, how they saw Middle Eastern people, how they saw people who were further south from Egypt, and how they saw people further north to the east of Egypt. And it's very important to be able to look at these not in terms of being able to define race and not being able to use them to say, okay, well, this is what everybody from this region looked like, but this is just a wide variety of the types of people that these various cultures knew, and it would have been the same kind of worldview that ancient Israelis would have seen. And because of the fact that any non-Jew can convert to Judaism and become a part of the Israeli nation, race, as we understand it modernly, has no meaning whatsoever. So if you go back to the other video, I mentioned several times that racism is avodah zarah, or paganism, or foreign work, which is what's literally translated. And one of the questions that comes up is how can I say that? One of the bases for avodah zarah is based upon mistaken and falsified logic. All nations are expected to reject it, and the Israeli nation is supposed to reject it and all other incorrect assertions. So where am I getting this from? Okay, well, when we look at race, this particular slide here is some information I pulled from various scientific sites, which basically denotes the way that people modernly try to use race in terms of specifically just skin color to define different things, basically disregarding nationality, language, and accepted cultural practices. Often when people throw these concepts out there, they go against all those three rules that I just listed in terms of the things that as Jews we're supposed to reject in terms of avodah zarah. Because of the fact that we know that these false concepts have been placed and used by nations that had institutionalized racism, as Jews, we are supposed to reject it. We can't go back and try to accept things that are known to be falsified, known to be untrue, and known to have no scientific basis. Once again, we have to look at it from our own perspective, not the way the world looks at it. Okay, so in order to prove my point, let's first look at the Rambam's commentary on the Mishnah, specifically the section on avodah zarah. As we can see from this particular section, he basically calls any incorrect information avodah zarah. It's listed in this section that the basis of it is something that starts as a falsehood or something that's untrue. So as Jews, we at all times have to reject those things that are false and untrue because they eventually lead into paganism or avodah zarah. The next thing we see is that the Rambam in the Mishnah Torah and the avodah zarah and the ways of the nations also lists that the fact that we're not supposed to imitate the ways or the laws of those nations that practice these things called avodah zarah or foreign worship or basically illogical concepts. So if any country ever, for example, had institutionalized racism and it had used falsehoods in order to perpetuate it, as a Jew you have to reject it. You've got no choice. So one of the prime examples we have in our tradition concerning rejecting avodah zarah, specifically in this area, racism, comes from our ancestor Avraham ben Terach. As we know from our history about him, he made it his mission to openly reject avodah zarah. He also made it a point to open his home to all four corners of the earth, basically meaning all peoples. We also know that Avraham took a stand at any chance he could against avodah zarah, as is listed in the Mishnah Torah, that basically says that he went out and taught people about the fact that some of the notions that they had were illogical and how they didn't make sense, and that he even went as far as to physically destroy those things that he knew were incorrect. So once again, this is our ancestor Avraham, and we're supposed to be living by that example. So as a Jew, you can't really reject that. If avodah zarah or any misinformation or misconceptions exist, you have to stand against it as a Jew. There's no way around it, because that's what we're supposed to do. So here's a newsflash. Every modern nation that has a history of institutionalized racism also has a history of avodah zarah. So now I'm brought to a very controversial topic, one that in the last, I would say, probably 50 or so years, has like a lot of mileage behind it. I may have to do a video on this in the future because it's so much information that has to be talked about. But if you look at this blog here listed called the Manishtana blog at manishtana.wordpress.com, he does a very good article about the fact that this whole curse of Hham thing is a myth and something that's not even rooted in Judaism. Along with a few other blogs, the basic issue boils down to the fact that this myth has been perpetuated by false and mistranslations of Hebrew text, and most of these mistranslations actually came out of Christian Europe in order to further their own goals. And, if you look at the actual Hebrew text themselves, it basically proves out that this whole thing is a myth and that it never existed within Jewish understanding. So these things are something you should check out if you're interested in this topic. Okay, so I think I've basically proven out the fact that as Jews, we have to call ourselves to a higher standard. And what this means is that any form of terminology or concepts that are derived from avodah zarah or derived from, countries that have had avodah zarah, especially in terms of racism, you have to reject it as a Jew. The ultimate conclusion is you must either choose to be a Jew or you can choose to walk in the ways of avodah zarah. It's pretty clear to me. There's actually a part of the Talmud that says that a real Israeli or a real Jew is one who stands up against avodah zarah. So, whether you believe in the Torah or not is up to you, but you can either choose to reject or fight against all forms of avodah zarah, including racism, or you can cast your lot with those who do paganism, those who accept misinformation, those who accept illogical concepts. And this is not about a Jewish or non-Jewish thing. This is like humanity, period. You can choose to live by your own logic, or you can choose to accept false logic that is not your own. As a Jew, you can make that choice if you want to, But, once again, I mean, rejecting your own logic just seems kind of foolish to me. So this is a Hav Ever. This is a month of positive solutions, and I'm going to be moving on to the next topic in the next video. So be on the lookout for that next week. Litzrot.